Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today we're doing another World Cup group breakdown, rosters, thingy, whatever you want to call it. Today we're taking a look at the America A group. Very interesting group. One of the big favorites in the World Cup is coming out of this group. So let's take a look at this group. You can see the countries here on your screen. We have Canada, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Mexico, Puerto Rico, and 2019 World Cup champions, the current reigning World Cup champions, the United States of America. So let's go in and let's take a look at all of the rosters, talk about them a bit, and I'll give you my thoughts on who I think will be the team to walk away from this group at the top and kind of overall thoughts on these teams. So let's begin by talking about Team Canada. Historically a pretty good team. 2019, one of their weaker performances. Back in 2017, they finished second in the World Cup, so pretty good run from them back then. 2018, they finished third. 2019, though, pretty rough outing for them as they finished in the kind of bottom group of that kind of top 10 alongside the UK. But it's a very different team now. Lots of new players on this roster, so let's throw their roster up here. You can see it. They have a DPS duo of Seeker and Noxious, tanks Astronex and False, and supports Magic, Mateball, Crimzo, and Cal. So I think the big name here on this roster is certainly Seeker, currently on the LA Valiant, formerly on the Boston Uprising. Very good hit scan player, the star of this roster in my opinion. The best player on this team in terms of just what he's able to do, in terms of how he's able to have impact on the game and the type of impact he's able to make. We have seen him time and time again pop off in numerous matches, even on the LA Valiant, who have not been particularly great this year. He has been one of the bright spots for that team. And alongside him on that damage group is Noxious. Very interesting signing here, though, not a huge surprise. Currently, he is in collegiate, playing on Harrisburg University. He's also spent some time on some other teams like Altiora. I believe he was actually also one of the people that I expected to see on this roster in the video that I made a few months ago. So it's an interesting signing here. Noxious is another hit scan heavy player, which is a little bit of a concern here. You know, they don't really have like someone who's a notable like flex DPS player, but Noxious certainly is a really good player. I'm not surprised to see him on this team. Their tanks, Astronex and False. False, of course, was a member of the Vancouver Titans last year. Not a great player last year on the Titans, unfortunately, but we saw him now. He's on Maryville. Maryville playing very, very well. Saints, that team, one of the better teams and contenders. He's going to be primarily the off-tank player, while Astronex is going to be your main tank player, so Winston, Ryan, stuff like that. Filling in the shoes, formerly held, of course, by XQC, who was the tank for Team Canada for several years, but now Astronex taking that up. Astronex is currently an active player in Contenders, playing on Rift, which not the best team in the world in terms of their overall thing. But they've done what they can, and it's an interesting kind of signing once again. Another guy who has some Contenders experience. And then their support trio, Magic, Mateball, Crimzo, and Cal. Crimzo, of course, on the Vancouver Titans. He is the only player on this World Cup roster that has been in the World Cup before. You have Magic, Mateball, main support player for Trick Room, and Cal, who is a flex support player on Timeless. I'm sure this trio will switch around. I think it's probably the strength of this roster, honestly, is this support trio plus Seeker. I think they're good players. I think it's a really interesting roster to look at. So I feel good about this Canada team. It's one of the few rosters here that has players that have Overwatch League experience and are currently active in Contenders. So I think the high-end level for this team is very, very good. I don't think they're going to be one of the best teams if we get into like the top 16. They have a chance when they get there. I think that's where they'll meet more of their match. But I think in this group, there's not a ton of really high-end talent in the Americas, unfortunately, outside of the US and Canada. Once you get into like South America, Central America, you don't really run into a lot of really high-level players. There are some, not as many, so I think Canada, with players like Seeker, Crimzo, False, Cal, should really be able to find some success in this group, and I think they'll be one of the teams that does advance. But we'll have to wait and see. Up next, we have Team Costa Rica, another interesting team to take a look at. This is a team that does not have the long bits of experience in kind of high-level World Cup play. They did play in the 2016 World Cup. They did not do well in that World Cup. Obviously, very, very different team now, but if you want to look at historic data, they struggled. They were in the bottom of their group. I believe they went 0-2. They won a single map. It was not good from them, so certainly some concern there over what this team has done in the past, but it's a new roster with new players, and so let's throw up their team here. You can see they have a damage duo of Jodelo and Winter. They have tank Spooky Spanish, supports WedTube, Benji, and Carmack, and then they have a flex player in Baru. I don't know exactly what Baru's main hero picks are. I think Baru, if I remember correctly, I think Baru plays a lot of things like, I think mostly Baru plays like damage, but also plays stuff like Doomfist. Like, I could be wrong, but I think that's what you're getting out of Baru. Baru might be there, honestly, just to kind of fill a lot of the things, but I think he's primarily their secondary tank player for this roster, because they only have one. They have 3 supports. They have 2 damage dealers. I think he'll probably be filling in wherever they kind of need him on either tank or damage. So it's an interesting roster to look at here. Not a ton of really high-end play. You just kind of look at what they kind of have done historically and just kind of looking at this roster now. None of these players have World Cup experience, which is certainly something to kind of be somewhat concerned about. Like I said with Canada, the Americas is not a great and deep region in terms of like contenders experience. Obviously, South American contenders is gone now. It doesn't exist anymore. So there's a lot of kind of question marks, I think, surrounding this Central America group with Costa Rica, Guatemala, and then, of course, you get into the other 2 North American countries, Mexico and Puerto Rico, and then the U.S., where you kind of have a little bit more of a known quantity. But Central and South America really is kind of a big question mark because we just don't see a lot of these players anymore. There's none, as far as I'm aware, in the Overwatch League right now who are born and raised in Central South America. There's not really many in contenders or collegiate either, so it's a very tough region to read. So I don't really know a lot about what this Costa Rica team has at their disposal. Historically, the team wasn't very good. It's a very different roster now. You can't really look at historic data as anything really more than kind of a small bit of information, but it's an interesting team to look at, I think, because when you have these unknowns, it really does kind of make you question what you're going to get. The infrastructure isn't there right now in South America and Central America when it comes to actual, teams and contenders, talent, all that type of stuff. But you can kind of expect things in a lot of situations with these teams to be surprised, right? Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad, we don't know. But I'm very intrigued, of course, by Costa Rica and by Guatemala, the other Central American team here. So let's move on and talk about this Guatemala roster, because I do think they are one of the more interesting teams to look at here. So they have a roster consisting of damage trio Richie, Arenas, and Noctis Paint. They have tank player Vendit Tyron and supports Marleo, Diego, and Vinzi. Similar to Costa Rica, so I figure I'll kind of group them together. Like I said, we don't know a lot about these players. We don't know a lot about this team, a lot about who they have, and all that type of stuff. If you look at Guatemala's history in the Overwatch World Cup, this is their first time in the World Cup. So when I say we don't know anything about what Guatemala has been or could be really this year, outside of kind of people who live in Guatemala or follow the scene much closer than I do and can, They're a huge question mark, right? A little more than even Costa Rica, because Guatemala's never competed on a national stage or the international stage. They've never had a roster put together. They've never been a team in the World Cup. So really, this is a huge question mark about the level of competition we get out of Costa Rica and Guatemala, because we don't know really what they're capable of. So if you out there are someone who is familiar with the Central American scene, and even the South American scene as well, but specifically for this video, the Central American scene, please leave a comment down below on any information you have, anything you know about any of these players. There's not a ton out there. Obviously, you can find Twitter accounts and stuff like that for the players. You can kind of get an idea of what they have going for them there. But it's hard to kind of fully judge teams based on tweets and Twitter accounts, because sometimes they, only show certain things, or they don't have their kind of full, it's hard to kind of judge people based solely on just ladder play and whatnot. And I don't follow every player in every region very, very closely. So Central America, South America, any of those regions, if you're familiar with them, leave comments. I would love to hear from you. Any information you can give me, very, very nice, very, very helpful. And that's one of the things that I am hoping to learn more about. That's why I'm also excited about this region, because there's teams that we don't really know a lot about. We don't know what to expect from them. The hope is that they all surpass expectations, and that we get really good matches and really good games. Will that happen? Who knows? But I at least like getting to the point where we can have some semblance of kind of surprises and teams we just don't expect to do much or don't know what to expect out of them doing well. It's always kind of the thing. It's why I'm excited about this region and some of the other regions as well that we kind of know about. But let's move on now and talk about Team Mexico. As you can see, Team Mexico's roster consists of a damage duo of Chobilux and Angel Volado. They have Tank Cisteria and Castled, and supports Sopa, Paulette, and Momo. They also have some substitute players. Not every roster does right now, at least announced. Mexico does. They have players Fervent, Sam, and Budget. Fervent, Sam are damage players. Budget is a tank player. I'd like to mention that just because you never really know what to expect. And Sam, in particular, the sub, is someone who was on the World Cup roster in 2019, so he has some experience in that regard. Most of this team, though, is inexperienced when it comes to playing in the World Cup. If you look at the historical kind of track record for this team, in the 2019 preliminaries, they lost to Russia in, I believe, the only game that they played. That is not true. They beat Latvia 3-0 and then lost to Russia 3-0. So in this region, I think Mexico is one of the more known quantity teams. Their head coach is Nomi, a former player in the Overwatch League. He played at one point in time, I believe, for the San Francisco Shock back in 2018, back in the old days, where he was a player in the 2019 and 2016 roster, and then now is coaching for this team in the World Cup. So that is a huge boon for this team. That is a huge boost for this team, having someone who's been there, has the experience, knows the game, and has gotten very high-level coaching as well. But the majority of these guys on this roster, the majority of the players on this team are new. They don't have that history. They don't have that familiarity. They don't have that World Cup pedigree. But there is way more investment in the past in Mexico as a region. We've seen more of what they're able to do in the past. They've had decent runs in the past. You go back to 2016, they finished top 3-4 in the America qualifier, which, is decent. It's not the best, but it is still a decent finish. They're not a team that has been just completely bodied in the past. And so it is a lot of unknowns who don't have a ton of Overwatch contenders or Overwatch League experience. They have a coach who has that history. They have a coach with that experience, which helps a lot. And I think if you look around at this team and you kind of think about where the talent is, I think they're one of the teams that I feel pretty good about. I think in terms of investment, in terms of what you've seen historically from Mexico, Mexico is usually a pretty solid roster and a pretty solid team that, generally speaking, we see pretty high-level play out of them. So I'm not surprised that Mexico fielded a roster that while a bunch of relative unknowns, looks to be pretty competitive and has a really good coach there kind of at the helm, someone who's a known quantity, who's been there, who's done that. And that is not a big thing in this region, right? Canada, yes, they have a coach who has been in the Overwatch League and who is an Overwatch League coach with Danny. And they have Tikati as an assistant coach, another person who's been in the Overwatch League. When we start getting to the U.S., I mean, their whole thing is Overwatch League level people. But Mexico having an Overwatch League caliber coach or someone who's been in the Overwatch League as a coach is really, really helpful. And I think that will be one of the things that makes them stronger as a region or as a team. And I think will be one of the things that will make them one of the potential teams to move out of this group. It's a bit more up in the air, I think, in terms of Mexico versus, say, like Canada, where I feel very confident that Canada will get out of this group. Mexico, I think, is a very good chance. I don't think it's a guarantee. I think it'll really come down to how well Nomi can get this roster together and how well they kind of play. But I do feel very good about this Mexico roster making it out of this region and potentially being one of the 16 teams playing in the main event at the World Cup. Next, let's take a look at Team Puerto Rico. Very, very interesting team because this is their first time in the World Cup. Obviously, Puerto Rico, a bit of a complicated situation with Puerto Rico in terms of whether or not you consider it a part of the U.S. This is the first time they are their own team for the sake of the World Cup, and so we can take a look at their roster here and talk about it. You can see that they have a damage trio of Loopy, Anderp, and Talisman, Tank, Papa Joe, and supports Zulex, Lightwolf, and Croy. So they have a very interesting looking team, and one of the things I want to mention is that they have an assistant coach who is currently active in the collegiate scene as the coach of UT Dallas. So someone who, once again, in that kind of system and in that scene, they have a pretty fleshed out committee. They have obviously a head coach and a general manager and a social lead, but they also have some assistant coaches and analysts outside of that. So they've put in a lot of work to build a really firm and good coaching staff, which not a lot of teams at the moment have done. This Puerto Rico roster announced their roster a bit later than some of the other ones, but they've gone all in, and they have put a lot of effort into building out a committee and a big kind of plan to have a really solid and strong roster, a really strong core and a base roster that can compete very, very well in this World Cup. And so I would put them in a similar camp to Mexico in a maybe makes it into that kind of top spot or that top 3 spot to kind of be one of those teams. And I think part of it is going to be based on some of their, players that they have here, like Loopy, formerly known as Pepe. He has been in contenders. He was in contenders in South America for a while, playing on the team Aggressive. And then, of course, he was doing well in the Puerto Rico Open Trials. He was on the team that won that. So if you look around, this is a team that, once again, a lot of kind of smaller, unknown players. Now, like I said, Loopy, the damage player, is probably the biggest known quantity. Did very well in the Puerto Rico Open Trials. So I think when you look at this team, similar to Mexico, their investment here in their coaching, I think, is the big difference maker. Whether or not the coaching staff can elevate these players to a high level, when we look and see the investment they have in that coaching staff, they're going all in, right? And I think when you consider just overall infrastructure in place in a place like Puerto Rico, I think you have a lot of kind of reason to think this Puerto Rico team should be able to compete very, very well. I think you have some of the similar social and habitual things you have with the USA because they are a part of the US. And so you have some of that same investment in terms of ability to kind of have access to some of the resources. It's not quite as big as it is in the US. It is certainly diminished in a place like Puerto Rico because Puerto Rico does not have the same investment by esports as other parts of the US do. But you can at least see that Puerto Rico has some of that same access where people in Puerto Rico can, if they reach that kind of high level, they're going to play against a lot of players from the US. They can go and compete in collegiate or in contenders in the US and be a part of that. So I think Puerto Rico is going to be in that boat of competing to get out of this group. It'll be very interesting. They're a very new team, obviously, like I said. They haven't been in the World Cup before, so it'll be very interesting to see what they're able to do when we get into the World Cup with a team, a lot of, like I said, other than Loopy, a lot of relative kind of unknowns that haven't really been big in the scene before. But someone will have to be the third team out of this group, whether it be Mexico, Puerto Rico, Costa Rica, Guatemala, we don't really know. And I think that really it's going to come down to how you're able to invest in kind of the resources and how you're able to invest into the players outside of just getting the best players, but also building out a strong coaching staff, strong support foundation is really important. And so to me, those are the two countries that I'm looking at to try to meet up with Canada and the final team in this group that I think is the favorite to get out of this group. And that, of course, is the United States of America. As I said before, they are the defending World Cup champions. They won it in 2019, and we can look at their current roster for the 2023 World Cup. They have Hydron, Speedily, and Sugar-Free as their damage trio. They have Kaluge and Super as their tanks, and they have OG and Ultraviolet as supports. They also have substitutes Aspire, Sam, and RuPaul, if that is kind of what they need. Super, the only player returning from that 2019 World Cup run, but he is, of course, an incredible player, one of the greatest players in Overwatch history, especially main tank players, if you want to just specifically stick to his role, but even beyond that, he is still one of the best players in the world. He may not be in the Overwatch League anymore, but honestly, the fact that he still competes at a very high level and is on this team, I think is huge, right? I think he's the leader for this team, he's the figurehead for this team, he's the guy that this team is going to rally behind and around, because Super wants to be a repeat champion. The majority of this roster is, of course, players from the Toronto Defiant. Hydron, Speedily, Kaluge, OG Ultraviolet, all play on the Toronto Defiant. Sugar-Free on the Vancouver Titans. So, ironically, almost every player on this team plays in Canada right now. And even if you go to their subs, 2 of them are playing in Canada, and then RuPaul playing in Florida. So this is a really interesting team. I think there is certainly some level of concern surrounding this team. If you look at the way the Toronto Defiant right now are playing in the Overwatch League, I've been talking about the Overwatch League a lot in my obviously weekly content, weekly uploads. The Toronto Defiant have been struggling a bit in the Overwatch League. I think that they should still be better than every team in this region. I think they still look better on paper, and I think that they have way more high-end competition. The Overwatch League, it's a lot harder to be really good when you're competing against multiple super teams of players that are either from Korea or just players with all different kind of backgrounds. It is a lot harder to kind of find success when you look at a team like the LA Gladiators, right? Where you have Dante from America, and Kai, and Funny Astro from the UK, and Kevster from Sweden, and Yaki, and Babel, and Lastro from South Korea. Like, you have this team that's kind of bringing in people from all over the world to build these super teams out, whereas Team USA, as represented predominantly on the Toronto Defiant, are sure like an American super team in many ways, but you are kind of competing with certain levels. And I think, generally speaking, one of the problems that the Toronto Defiant are having right now is tank flexibility isn't as high as I would want it to be, and I think that flex DPS has been a bit of a sour spot for them. I don't think Hydron, Speedily, and Sam cover everything in the best way. I think Sugar-Free is a super dynamic player who I think makes up for a lot of the things that they're lacking on that Defiant roster. So to me, this is a better version of what we have right now with the Toronto Defiant. This is a just overall improvement to an already pretty good looking Defiant roster. So I think Team USA is easily the favorite in this group, easily the favorite to come out of North America. Head coach Gator, who of course currently coaches the arguably best team in the Overwatch League, the Atlanta Reign. They have Ye, who's the general manager of Florida Mayhem, as the general manager for this team. So if you look at this team, you look at their coaching staff, the investment they have, this team will be very, very good. This team should be the #1 team coming out of this region. I don't think it would be as big of a shock if, say, Canada came out as the top team in this region as it would be, like I talked about last week in the APAC A region. Like, if South Korea doesn't win APAC A, that's a huge shocker. If the US doesn't win this group and gets second behind Canada, it would be a shock, but it wouldn't be like the end of the world. Sure, there'd be some reason for concern, but we look around, the high-end talent on Canada isn't that far off from the high-end talent on the US. I just think the US has more depth than that Canada roster, but depending on what the meta is, depending on what, kind of we get, it's very possible that Canada is the top team coming out of this group. But I would say the U.S. is the favorite to come out of this group, just looking at what this roster has. So to firmly kind of put forth a prediction here in this group, I would say Team USA, #1 team out of this group. I think they should be getting out of this group with minimal damage, minimal losses, one maximum is my kind of thought process. I think Canada is the #2. I think they probably are able to beat every team here except for maybe the U.S., right? To me, it's like Canada, U.S., one of them is going to lose one game, one of them is going to lose no games, and that's going to determine who gets out. And then Mexico and Puerto Rico, to me, are the next two. One of those two teams will get out of this group. I think right now I feel a little bit more confident in Puerto Rico in terms of its overall infrastructure and its overall kind of team and committee. I think they want to come out, and they want to come out swinging, and they want to really show what Puerto Rico is able to do. Mexico, as much as I think Nomi as a coach is a huge step in the right direction, I don't know if I feel as confident in this team as a potential kind of team to move on. I think Costa Rica and Guatemala, it's very tough to get out of this group because I don't think they have the same level of investment that you have, like I said, in Mexico or in Puerto Rico, or I just think that they have way more infrastructure and structure in place that I think they are in a better place right now. But between Mexico and Puerto Rico, I'm leaning right now slightly more towards Puerto Rico, but I think it's very, very close. I think it's going to be one of those two coming out as the third team out of this group. That's going to be all for this video for today. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below if you think any of these teams are better than I'm saying, if any of these teams are worse than I'm saying, whatever you think it may be, that is up to you to leave in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video and want more like it in the future, consider liking and subscribing, as your support does help out a bunch with the channel. That's going to be all from me for today. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.